We also heard this week that Australia is looking to pass a brand new law that means social media platforms could be fined up to 5% of their global revenue if they fail to remove disinformation and misinformation. As I've said, and as my research would show, still to this day there hasn't been a clear description to explain what dis or misinformation actually is specifically. So there is going to be some talk, and there's some worries about the bill that it puts more powers into the regulators and the government to potentially silence discerning opinions, or depending on their interpretation of the law. So this is a conversation around how do we crack down on mis and disinformation, right? And without going all over the stuff I've already described and already talked about in other shows, I think it's a conversation around making a clear understanding and a clear distinction between what is proven to be factually correct and giving more. There was a video I saw on TikTok, and if I can dig it out, I'll add it into this video and put it in the description, where a quote-unquote social media influencer, hate the word, but a social media influencer talked about the fact that one of the solutions, or a solution here, isn't to censor more information, because you just amplify that information, because people rightly think that information has been silenced for a reason, especially if it does talk contradictory to a narrative of a government, for example, or a regulator, for example. And actually, one of the ways could be to do, using X as an example, add a community note to these things.
Perhaps I'm one of the most qualified members of the European Parliament to talk about social media platforms, as myself, I'm a social media influencer by profession. I believe the Digital Service Act is a positive step forward, but I want to focus more on an important aspect of it. I strongly believe the way to fight hate speech and disinformation is definitely not censorship. Instead, I will propose that we encourage the platforms to create organic fact-checking systems to inform their users about the validity of the information they receive. A good example of this is Community Notes of Twitter, which allows its users to highlight information when they believe that is factually incorrect. Now, in an era of artificial intelligence, more than ever, we need to focus on what is actually true, not by censoring, but just by letting people know the facts and freely decide.
And say, actually, no, this is not factually correct. And for me, as someone who looks on the internet quite a lot for information, for me, it comes back to, do you trust the source? Are you, as a viewer, able, or do I feel it's important for you to do your own information and look at your own research? But also, how well do I double check what it is? And if I don't know 100%, I'm going to say the words allegedly. I'm going to say, if this is true. And I think that's how we open up the dialogue, to say, well, this is a worrying piece of information. I haven't been able to externally verify whether it's true or not, but if it is true, this would be a reaction. And I think for me, that's really important, because if we go down this road of going after people who are allegedly spreading misinformation or allegedly spreading disinformation, we could be in a position where, by having a narrative view that doesn't necessarily agree or synergize with a government, right? Then of course that's how censorship can work. Of course that's how one-sided of arguments are going to happen, and that's going to erode the alleged democratic state that we have, right? Because we're meant to be free thinking. We're meant to be able to critically think and be intelligent enough to critically think about the information we're given. Can we do that if every narrative, or another narrative that's not overly accepted or not popular or not politically correct, is just struck off or taken off by a platform because it's worried that it's going to have 5% of its revenue just fined 5% of its global revenue, which for these social media companies is obviously going to be a huge number and will hurt their bottom line. Are they going to create pay-to-play situations like we saw on X when Elon took it over? Are we going to be in a position where actually you are kind of pushed into what's politically acceptable and what the government feels is a good opinion? We should have that. Is that fair? Is that an open democratic state? I'll let you decide personally, I know what my view is on that, and I think it's very important to allow you to be educated on the truth and the facts. So if they're going to go down this road of creating a law around it and adding fines on it, they need to specifically make a very clear distinction on what is misinformation and what is disinformation. Referring back to my notes, however, the Australian Minister for Communications, Michelle Rowland, said misinformation and disinformation poses a serious threat to the safety and well-being of Australians, as well as our democratic and social and economy. So socially, democratically, and socially, as in the fabric of what's going on in regards to their society. Doing nothing will allow this problem to get worse, as it's not just an opinion. According to Australian media, the Australian Media Alliance, 80% of Australians say that the spread of misinformation on social media needs to be addressed. So it's clear there needs to be more control for social media platforms that hold such power. However, surely we need to be careful with going down this road, because, as I referred to a moment ago, we need to be careful that we don't shut down the opposing side of an argument when it comes to a specific view, right? Have the right to say. I think the quote originally was around, like, I'm going to defend your right to say it, I may not agree with you, etc. That kind of thing, and that's really important, of course. Do you think this law is too vague? It's a question to you. Or does it bring in line with our own European laws? And again, I would ask the same question about those, where, is this a way, or is this the way of challenging mis and disinformation? With the this isn't in a vacuum, with the heightening of pressures related to Russia, for example, who has allegedly been known for spreading disinformation and misinformation online, as we've just talked about in other shows. Are we going to see this rise, especially on platforms like X, where there is going to be this disinformation and misinformation shared? And if so, how do we go about dealing with that? My view is we need to be very clear on understanding how, what, and when misinformation is done. Maybe a solution is what that gentleman did say in, I believe it was the European Parliament. As I say, if I can find it, I'll link it down below. That said, adding community notes, adding other context, adding when specifically this video that we're seeing resurface on social media was actually sourced and what it was potentially about, if the main poster is trying to mislead by posting it. I think giving people more information is always going to be helpful and always going to allow things to be more fact-checked and safer, and not go into or not move into our kind of unconscious bias that we have. But that's my thoughts. I would love to hear yours down below.